Shortly after sunrise on June 6, 1944, in the small Norman village of Himavez, a group of American paratroopers from Headquarters Company, 1st Battalion, 507th Parachute Infantry Regiment, found themselves far from their intended drop zone. Lieutenant Robert W. Schutt, the Sticks jumpmaster, quickly gathered the men, 12 in all, and moved them into a small wooded area for cover. 2 were injured during the jump: Private Robert G. Watson, who had a sprained ankle, and Corporal Fred G. Wandell, who had broken his pelvis after landing in a tree. Schutt positioned the men along the tree line and ordered a small patrol, Privates Ashton Landry, PFC Paul Moore, and PFC Charles Wright, to scout a nearby farmhouse for directions. The patrol encountered the Brissette family at La Castelle, who warned them of nearby German forces. The trio was led into a barn to hide as the sound of hobnailed boots approached and receded. Meanwhile, the main group in the woods prepared for the inevitable contact. A 12-man German patrol, having moved west along a hedgerow toward the trees, entered the area. Schutt ordered his men, except for the severely injured Wandell, into a shallow creek ditch along the tree line, hoping to resist the approaching enemy. Within minutes, the Germans had maneuvered around both of Schutt's flanks. A brutal hand-to-hand fight erupted. Private Watson, the lightly injured man, was struck to the ground with a rifle butt and repeatedly beaten in the head, crushing his skull. PFC Daniel B. Tillman was knocked onto his back and repeatedly bludgeoned above the right eye. Private Andrew W. Kling was shot through the heart, stabbed in the chest with a bayonet, and then clubbed repeatedly until the top of his skull collapsed. As the firefight reached this grisly climax, the paratroopers ceased fire, and one waved a white handkerchief, signaling surrender. The 4 surviving enlisted men were disarmed, stripped of their helmets and equipment, and searched by the Germans. Their personal possessions, including paybooks, letters, and money, were returned. Corporal Wandell, still conscious but severely injured, was carried away by his captors to a German field hospital where he would later recover. Lieutenant Schutt was taken for further interrogation, leaving the 4 enlisted men, Private Robert E. Werner, Private Delmar C. McElhaney, PFC Ellsworth M. Heck, and Private Anthony J. Hitzteller, in the hands of their captors. For reasons that remain unknown, the Germans executed these 4 men in cold blood. Pierre Renault, a local resident cycling to work, witnessed the Americans being marched through a cattle gate and across a field to the woods where they had been captured hours earlier. At approximately 8 a.m., the prisoners were shot in the back of the head. Their bodies were then scattered in the trees, likely to give the appearance that they had died during the earlier firefight. Later that afternoon, Leon Lequartier, another resident, stumbled upon the bodies while collecting firewood and reported the discovery to the assistant mayor, Emile Lane. The 2 men returned to the scene, where Lane received orders from Major Gustave Felix at the chateau to bury the victims that evening. Villagers were assembled to dig a common grave at the cemetery of Église Notre-Dame. A priest from nearby Erville provided a blessing, and the 7 paratroopers, including the 4 executed men, Tillman, Kling, and Hitztaler, were buried in a brief but dignified service. The massacre was investigated formally on June 22, 1944, when the Graves Registration Company returned to Himavez. They marked the precise locations where each man had fallen, documented the scene with motion picture footage, and staged a reenactment using soldiers as stand-ins. Each body was exhumed and examined by Captain Theodore F. Wright, with wounds meticulously recorded. Tillman had a crushed skull above the right eye. Werner had been shot through the cheek with the bullet exiting his forehead. Hitztaler was shot in the nape of the neck. McElhaney suffered massive cranial trauma. Watson had been beaten behind the left ear with a rifle butt. Heck was shot behind the right ear, and Kling bore a gunshot wound beneath the left shoulder blade, a bayonet wound to the chest, and extensive head injuries. The investigation confirmed that all 7 paratroopers had been murdered unlawfully. Wandell, who had survived due to his serious injuries and subsequent medical care, later testified that he had been treated considerately by the Germans and had neither witnessed nor heard of any mistreatment of others. This stark contrast between Wandell's survival and the deliberate killing of his comrades, some lightly injured, remains unexplained. An official court of inquiry convened in Himavez in November 1944, hearing testimony from Landry, Moore, Wright, and local witnesses, Pierre Renault, and Emile Lane. The final report, issued in March 1945, concluded that the killings violated the Geneva Conventions and constituted murder. No evidence suggested that the paratroopers had forfeited their rights as prisoners of war. Yet, as the war drew to a close, no perpetrators could be identified and no justice was served. In the aftermath, the bodies of the victims were moved first to a temporary U.S. military cemetery at Stemir Église, and later to the U.S. military cemetery at. In the aftermath, the bodies of the victims were moved first to a temporary U.S. military cemetery at Sainte-Mère Église, and later to the U.S. military cemetery at Omaha Beach. Some, like Daniel Tillman, Ellsworth Heck, Robert Watson, and John Katona, were eventually returned to the United States, while others, Anthony Hitztaler, Robert Werner, Delmar McElhaney, and Andrew Kling, remained in France. The Normandy American Cemetery now permanently commemorates their sacrifice. The Himavez massacre remains a stark example of the atrocities that can occur even amid the chaos of war. While most captured paratroopers were treated in accordance with the laws of war, these 7 men were singled out for unexplained brutality. Some were beaten to death, others shot and bayoneted, while one survivor received careful medical attention. The reason for this selective violence remains a mystery, highlighting the capricious and cruel nature of the massacre. Today, the village of Himavez continues to honor the memory of the murdered American paratroopers. A sign on the cattle gate leading to the woods bears the words "N'oublions jamais," let us never forget. Their story, largely absent from popular histories of D-Day, remains preserved by the village and serves as a solemn reminder of the human cost of war.